Florian Rotwood Harbinger is one of the coolest heroes ever released in the game of Flesh and Blood, and he has become one of my favorite decks to play. While most heroes start off at their strongest and get weaker as time goes on, Florian is one of the few who actually gets more powerful. After getting some earth cards in the graveyard, you then decompose them away and work your way up to having 8 in Banished, which activates his hero ability, which then lets you generate extra tokens. Basically, he's a Golgari token deck except in Flesh and Blood. But the thing is, outside of needing to decompose and buffing token generation, Florian's a pretty open-ended hero. There are several different builds out there, from Scepter OTK to just good old mid-range value grind, but the deck I'm going to share with you today is neither of those. If you read the title, you might have already guessed, but this is a Channel Mount Heroic Florian deck tech. There is so much that I could say about this hero and why I love playing him. Not only do we get to play the value grind game with our extra Rune Chants, but we also get to throw some massive big dick damage against decks that give us the room to drop a Mount Heroic. This deck is super flexible, extremely fun, the hero ability is incredibly strong, and just, man, I love Florian. So allow me to share with you my Florian deck tech, aptly titled, She Channel My Mount Till I Heroic. When it comes to building and playing a deck in Flesh and Blood, having a goal is imperative. The goal for this CMH Florian is to be flexible. No matter what, Florian's hero ability has us wanting to decompose to get 8 earth cards in Banish, which then lets us create extra tokens, namely Rune Chants. But how we get to our decompose differs depending on what hero we're fighting. The deck can easily play a more aggressive game, leaning on Channel Mount Heroic and a number of extenders to beat the opponent down to low life totals, where our Rune Chants in the mid game will force them to give us more cards than they'd like. But you can also flip the script, using less extenders and decomposing on defense in order to wait out the aggressive decks long enough to wrestle back control as they run out of gas. This makes CMH Florian a toolbox deck, which is my favorite type of deck to play. I personally love being able to cover most of my bases rather than excelling at just one specific thing. And if you want to play a deck that can alter its game plan to deal with most other heroes, then this may be the hero for you. For this video, I'm gonna break the deck up into sections, going over the hero, weapon, and equipment first, then the Decompose package, the Rune Chant generation, the CMH package, the extra bit of disruption, the sideboard, and a few budget options for those who can't afford this deck because unfortunately, it's a bit expensive. I also want to mention here, so that I don't need to repeat it, but almost every card in the deck is a 3 of unless I mention otherwise. Also, just for the record, there aren't the 6 different 1 of tech pieces in this deck that you have no idea why they're there. I like my decks the same way I like my people at tournaments. Clean. Of course, as always, the deck list is in the description below, but if you could at least subscribe while you're down there, I'd really appreciate it. Florian Rotwood Harbinger reads, if there are 8 or more earth cards in your banish zone, Florian gets, if you would create 1 or more aura tokens, instead create that many plus 1 of each of those tokens. This ability is actually nuts when it's active, especially considering all the Rune Chant cards we get to run. Needless to say, activating Florian's ability is a huge part of our game plan, and it sort of separates each game into 2 parts. Part 1 is where we are actively trying to get earth cards in grave and playing our decomposed cards, and part 2 is taking advantage of our fair and balanced ability to throw a bajillion Rune Chants at our opponents. For the weapons and equipment, this deck plays just the standard Florian kit. Reaping Blade is our weapon, and then Face Purgatory, Barkskin of the Millennium Tree, Grasp of the Arknight, and Well Grounded are our base lineup. Reaping Blade is the weapon of choice because it's a 1 for 3 and fits our late game curve amazingly. Whether it's just Grasps into Reaping or a Bramble Spark into an extender into Grasps into Reaping, this weapon is the clear-cut options for this deck. Just keep in mind that the ability to stop life gain affects you as well. As for the equipment, Face Purgatory lets us stop a larger attack while also ripping a card from the opponent's hand and drawing us a new card. This is great to use when there's a big enough attack coming at us and our opponent has another card they either plan to send or arsenal for next turn. Barkskin is a genuinely insane chess piece because as long as we have 4 or more earth cards in Banish, it gives us an embodiment of earth token on block, or 2 once Florian is active, and it has temper. This means that using this and a 3-block non-attack action is 6 on the first block, 5 on the second, or 7 and 6 if Florian is active. That is a crazy amount of block, but what's even crazier is that it's not even the best equipment piece. Grasp of the Arknight is the most important card in this entire deck. The ability to make 2 Rune Chants turn after turn after turn is a massive part of what makes Florian so powerful. It is not uncommon at all to be activating this literally every turn in the late game. If you're building Florian as a budget deck first, this is the first equipment you should upgrade if you can afford it. As for well-grounded, well, these aren't super flashy, but they're still so good. You can't use them until you have 4 banished earth cards like the Bark Skin, but once you're there, it prevents the next 2 damage you'd be dealt. This helps cover breakpoints, small attacks, and arcane damage. What other boots do that? Plus, it's an earth card, so you can break them to prevent damage and to get another card to decompose at instant speed. I think it goes without saying, but Florian has just an insane equipment suite. Like, it's actually nuts, and this is just his base armor. You still have other pieces that are in our sideboard. Crown of Dichotomy and Diotic Carapace serve as arcane barrier for the deck, although I will say there is the option to swap the crown for Null Rune Boots if you'd rather keep the face Purgatory into the other Rune Blade. Next up, we have a card that no one else has ever run in their deck, Fiendal Spring Tunic. This card is quite nice against the grindier decks like New, but can also help into Enigma because you'll need to be as aggressive as possible to keep her board state down. And speaking of Enigma, we also have Plume of Evergrowth specifically for her. The goal is to get a Summer's Fall into the grave as quickly as possible so that you can plume it back after they play a Miragai or a 10k. Simple, but effective. However, that is it for the equipment, so it's time to get into the core of the deck with the Decomposed package. Because Florian's ability is so powerful, the first and foremost goal of the deck is to fill the grave with earth cards, then decompose them away. Thankfully, LSS have not only blessed us with powerful equipment, but powerful decomposed cards as well. Felling of the Crown and Plow Under are 2 of the most fair and balanced cards ever created in the game of Flesh and Blood. Both of them power themselves up once you have 4 earth cards in Banish, but it's their decompose abilities that make them so stupidly strong, as they force each player to either tuck a card in hand or a card in arsenal on attack. They don't need to hit. All you gotta do is attack and decompose, and they can't really be interacted with. Felling forces you to tuck a card in hand before you get to block or pitch to Arcane Barrier, while Plow Under can tuck a defense reaction before the opponent even gets the chance to use it from their arsenal. These cards do the best of both worlds, getting you to your hero ability and super disrupting the opponent's game plans. Just don't forget that they affect you as well, and you'll be golden. But following that, we've got Blue Summer's Fall. Blue earth cards are very important for the deck in general, and the ability to tuck auras is also quite relevant. Whether you're tucking a Miragai against Enigma, a Malefic Incantation versus Viserai, or just getting rid of an Inertia token that Azalea gave you, this card is surprisingly strong. Don't be afraid to attack with it just to decompose and disrupt your opponent a little bit. But then next up, we've got both red and yellow Rootbound Carapaces. This card is just a defense reaction that buffs itself when you decompose, so it's really nothing flashy. But sometimes you're going to be on the defensive, and so being able to decompose while you block out a super aggressive deck is super necessary. And to round out this package, I've got 2 non-decomposing cards in both the blue Autumn's Touch and Fruits of the Forest, which is one of the few 2-ofs in the deck. Autumn's Touch is just a blue block 3 earth card, but considering there's not that many, it's pretty much mandatory to run. Fruits only blocks 2, but has the nice ability to discard itself at instant speed to gain 2 life. Only blocking for 2 does hurt this card a bit, which is why it's at 2, but that being said, it's very versatile. Sometimes you want to play Rootbound Carapace and decompose, but you don't have enough earth cards in Banished, and Fruits of the Forest can just discard itself and put itself there at instant speed rather than blocking and being stuck on the combat chain. But that is it for the Decomposed package. One little bit of advice though is that you really want to try to get to your 8 banished earth cards with just 3 decomposes. Banishing 3 earth, 3, and then 2 is the quickest way to get there, and so you want to make sure that you're getting enough earths and graves so that you don't need to decompose a 4th time just to activate Florian. And so with all that covered, let's take a look at the payoff for all this decomposing, the Rune Chant generation. Or as I like to call it, the Goon Chant generation. That's a really bad joke. I probably shouldn't put that in the video. Rune Chants are a key part of Florian's strategy. Whether you're looking to stack them or just use them as small bits of split damage to grind the opponent out, you need to be making them constantly. Of course, the biggest Rune Chant generator is Grasps, as I mentioned earlier. Just having a pitch outlet every turn that makes 2 is just so absolutely fair and balanced, but it's not all we've got. Arcane Seeds in Life is an instant and non-attack action that gains you 1 life on one side and says make a Rune Chant twice on the other. Before Florian's active, it's just 1 and 2 Rune Chants, but once you've hit the magic number of Earths and Banish, this makes 4 Rune Chants because Florian affects each time you would create them. This makes Arcane Seeds a 0 for 5 in the late game, and it's on an Earth 3-block non-attack action. On top of that, you can also do the same as Fruits of the Forest, where if you need an Earth and Banish for a Rootbound Carapace, you can just play the life-side at instant speed to do so. There's so much flexibility with this card, and it really just embodies everything that Florian is about. And another gorgeous card that also makes tokens one at a time is Germinate. This card is a blue block 3 that has the ability to pay double X into it. You either make a Rune Chant or Embodiment of Earth token and repeat X times. Keep in mind that you get an extra token for each activation when Florian is online. Oh, and you also gain X+1 life after this card. It just does a lot, okay? It does a lot. Malefic Incantation, on the other hand, does just one thing, but it does it wonderfully. It's a 0-cost aura that can make 3 or later 6 Rune Chants, triggering once per turn when we attack with an attack action. This card pairs really well with all the extenders in the deck, but can also be played on the more defensive setup turns, ready to rack up the Rune Chants once Florian is online. And last up for Rune Chant generation is good old Dread Triptych. This blue block 3 is a 3-for-4 attack action that has 3 separate abilities. There's a lot of 3s, all of them making Rune Chants if you meet a requirement. The first and easiest is just playing a non-attack action before you attack with it, but the other 2 trigger off hitting with physical and arcane respectively. This makes the card a possible 3 for 10 value if you get 6 Rune Chants in the late game, but really it just forces cards out of your opponent's hand to block everything. But I mean, that's also pretty good. Although you can make Dread Triptych, and every other attack in the deck for that matter, much harder to block thanks to the Channel Mount Heroic portion of the deck. She channel my mount till I heroic. Channel Mount Heroic is one hell of a Flesh and Blood card. This 3-cost aura has a very simple ability. It gives all your attack action cards +3. And I don't think I need to explain why that's really, really good. Of course, it has the downside of needing to pitch Earth cards to keep it around, but that's why we run 17 Earth Blues in the deck. And obviously the game plan with this card is quite simple. You play it, things get big, lots of damage, unga bunga, opponent dead. It's Channel Mount Heroic is good, okay? I think we can agree it's a good card. And to act as a mini channel, we're also running 3 Bramble Spark. Fusing this with an Earth card lets us give our next attack action +3 and deal an arcane on attack, which helps us extend our damage output. And then we've got 2 blue Earth cards from the Terra First Strike deck of all things, the first being the blue Flourish. This card doesn't buff attacks itself, but instead increases the amount of attack gained. This pairs with Felling and Plowunder's own effects, some of the extenders we're about to cover, and of course, Channel Mount Heroic. Most of the time it's just a blue Earth card, but the fact that we can use the ability to help close out games is just a nice upside. It's also great to open with going first because you can just play it for free and get it into grave. The second card from the Terra deck, however, is the block card Canopy Shelter. This is a 2-block blue Earth card that unfortunately doesn't synergize with our Barkskin because it's not a non-attack action, but it comes with its own upside. Blocking with Canopy Shelter makes a Might token, which becomes 2 once Florian is active. And you're likely going to be blocking with this later in the game anyway, since you can just use it for pitch on the first cycle. And being able to power up an attack for the next turn by simply blocking is pretty nice, especially when that attack is a CNC for 7 or 8. But of course, Channel Mount Heroic and its kin would be mediocre at best if not for the extenders in the deck. Starting with Swarming Gloomville, this card fits right at home with Florian. You'll always have the ability to pitch to Grasps to at least turn on Go Again, but if your hero ability is active, then this attacks for 4 as well. Finishing the chain with a Reaping Blade makes Swarming and a blue a 2-card 9 in the late game. In a similar vein, we then have Scar for a Scar at 2 copies. Now, this isn't a super popular card in most Florian builds, but personally, I really like it, okay? It does require you to play the minigame of having less life than an opponent to get its full value, but it's not that hard to do, especially if you need to take a turn off to set up a Channel Mount Heroic. And in the late game, you can claw your way back in by doing the same as Swarming and playing a 2-card 9. However, one card that is agreed upon by pretty much every Florian player is Enlightened Strike. This beast of a card just does everything we want it to. Need an extender? 5 Go Again. Ending a chain? Send it for 7. Or heck, maybe even send it for 5 and then draw a card to Arsenal. It's the flexibility of E-Strike that makes it so strong in pretty much every deck, but especially a toolbox deck like Florian. Now, one very important note about playing Channel Mount Heroic in this deck versus something like Briar is that your entire game plan doesn't revolve around it in the same way. If you have a hand where blocking with the channel makes sense, just do it. For example, you're probably not going to have huge power turns into heavy disruption decks like New or Azalea. There, you can lean on the fact that it's an Earth non-attack action that blocks 3. And the nice part is that even if you don't play a CMH in a game, your extenders can still be leaned on as 2-card plays to help grind back control, so they're not useless if you don't drop the channel. Of course though, no good toolbox deck would ever be complete without any disruption, and while Felling, Plow Under, and Summer's Falls are all great disruption pieces already, I mean, Felling and Plow Under are like actually so fair and balanced, but we've got just a few more. What would a classic constructed deck be without Command and Conquer in it? A lot cheaper, that's what. But regardless of its price, it's an incredibly powerful card, and so we're playing it. That really not much more to say here though. Like, the card is good and everybody knows it. What do you want me to say? Thankfully, the next card is dirt cheap, and it's also our last two of in the main board, Condemned to Slaughter. This card is a nice blue block 3 non-attack action, making it great with Barkskin, but its ability is also solid. By popping a Rune Chant from our grasps, we can force an opponent to destroy one of their own auras. This can be strong against not only Enigma, but also other rune plates. If your Viserai opponent drops a single Malefic and ends their turn without a Rune Chant, or Aurora has a Channel Lightning Valley out, you can just remove them from the field. Unfortunately, getting expensive again, the last card is Warmonger's Diplomacy. It's a blue block 3 non-attack action, and it hurts certain opponents more than us when we play it. Usually you pick War with this card and throw a big attack like a Felling, but if you've got a Channel Mount Heroic in Arsenal, you can always choose Peace to set up. As I said, these three cards paired with Felling and Plow Under give this deck the ability to constantly disrupt the opponent, which is really important into literally every matchup. Of course, some of those matchups are a bit worse than others, and that's where we have the sideboard. Sideboards in Flesh and Blood are really difficult to do. I've adapted mine to fit the metagame at my locals, which might reflect yours, but it also might not. On top of that, what cards you take out and put in can change for not only different matchups, but also how you as a player want to play into them, and because of this, please take this sideboard with a huge grain of salt, and feel free to make any changes you feel are necessary. Although, one card I'm sure everyone is going to run is Red Summer's Fall. Just like the blue, this clears auras from Enigma and other rune blades, and you'll want to bring them into those matchups. Personally, I swap out Rootbound Carapaces if I'm trying to be offensive, and Bramble Sparks if I'm trying to be more defensive. But next up is Runeblood Incantation. Being able to send split damage is key to pinging off ward auras, but this card is also in here for just those slower matchups. Decks like Guardians or New will try to grind you out as they can disrupt you with on hits, and they run tons of blues to block your arcane. And so going up and over with Rune Chants is key, at least in my experience. This card also pairs great with Tunic as you can play it off that resource. If you're looking to deal with Enigma specifically, I'd probably remove the other set of yellow Rootbound Carapaces and either swap the Bramble Sparks or even the Malefic Incantations for matchups where you know you won't be attacking as frequently as you'd like. For the matchups where you need to be on super defense though, there's Haunting Rendition. I just covered this card in my last video on hand traps and Flesh and Blood, and you should go check it out, and so it brings me joy to actually play the card. Its purpose is to be a 4-block card against heroes like Aurora and Dash.io who have a lot of breakpoints that need to be covered, and if we survive the onslaught long enough to get into the mid to late game, you can also use it for its prevention effect to make Rune Chants to start swinging the tempo in your favor. And if you're playing a super defensive game plan into those decks, then taking out the Malefic Incantations would be fine, as you're not going to get as much value from them if you're not able to attack much. And last but not least, there are 2 copies of Erase Face for those troublesome aggro matchups. Viserai and Dash.io especially care about their class, and this card straight up stops them. This swap is extremely simple too. 2 Scars, trade for 2 Erase Faces. While you are almost guaranteed to be at lower life than Dio or Vis, disrupting them is far more effective than just having a good value line with Grasp, Scar, and Reaping. Again, sideboards are always changing, and there are so many cards that you can run. In fact, I've left a bunch of extra cards in the maybe portion of the deck on February, so you can take a look at the other things people are running and make any changes you'd like. And if you're looking for some budget options for this hero, this next part's for you. So I'm gonna straight up say this right now, Florian does not make for the best budget hero, as a few of his more expensive cards, namely Felling, Plow Under, and Grasps, are pretty pricey. But I've done the very best I can to come up with the best budget replacements I can think of for the expensive cards. The first would be swapping out Grasp of the Arknight with Vexing Quillhand. It makes 3 Rune Chants when Florian is online, which isn't terrible at all, but the ability to make 2 Rune Chants every turn with Grasps is genuinely stupidly strong, so this really is the first equipment piece you'll want to upgrade if you truly want to stick with the hero. As for the other legendaries, well, you can just not run Tunic in the side, and you could trade Dyadic Carapace for a couple of no rune pieces if you have to. You could also skip the Face Purgatory and run any of the generic legendary helms if you have them, but if not, you can go with the Helm of Lignum Vitae, I think, Helm of Ligma Balls! The Helm of Ligma. It can block 2 once you have 4 banished earth cards, and it's an earth card itself. As for the chess piece, you could run up deep blue to save you from a clunky all-red hand. Moving on to the actual deck, Felling and Plowhunter are key pieces of what makes Florian so strong, but you can swap them out by taking the red Summer's Falls from the sideboarding, putting them in, and then maybe running the red Cadaver's Tillings in their place. Enlightened Strikes can be replaced with Ravenous Rabble as another extender, or even Autumn's Touch Reds if you'd rather have the 2-card 7. Command and Conquer can be swapped for a card like Humble, Hand Behind the Pen, or again, those red Autumn's Touch. Swarming Gloomveils can be easily swapped for Rune Rager Swarms, as they basically do the same thing, except that Rune Rager can't pump itself. As for Warmongers, this can be any number of blue block 3 non-attack actions like Oath of the Arknight or Looming Doom, or you could just even run more blue earth cards in its slot. Whatever your budget, I'm gonna have 3 total lists down below. The full deck, a mid-budget deck with the necessary pieces like Grasp of the Arknight, and a super budget deck if you're looking to just try the hero without investing too much. Whatever list you choose, I really hope you enjoy playing Florian. This hero surprised me with just how fun he is. But what's crazy is that, like, I should have known that I would like him this much. Like I said at the start, he feels very much like a Magic the Gathering Golgari token deck, what with him basically being a Parallel Lives and the whole, you know, decomposing your earth cards from grave into banish. And like, I loved those decks in Magic. It just feels really awesome to be playing something that feels so familiar, but in flesh and blood. So hopefully with one of these lists, you come to appreciate this hero as much as I do. Because man, I love Florian. I also love all of my Chadley patrons who are as sexy as the Emo King himself. You know who you are. We've got the Giga Chad Saint, Geeks First, Elixir, Vinny, Smokeopotamus, John, Ty, James, Chemical, Bryant, Transient Fire, Dark Memoria, Big Hungry, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Then we've got the Alpha Chads Thomas and Dejima, and finally there's the Super Chads Thal, Cece, Eric, Ben, and Yogbadoodles21. I'm also just remembering right now that I think I gained another patron right before I edited this video. So you know what? This is nobody's watching this part. So to the patron who just joined, let me go. I have, the email. Let me see. Thank you to Aaron H. I don't know what tier you're on exactly, but thank you for joining my Patreon. I appreciate it. You are all wonderful. I love you all. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you. Bye-bye. Mwah.